Hello, everyone. So today I'm back with another guest, Jordan Turner. Hi, Jordan. So you're a
Hey.
health and wellness coach and a breathwork practitioner. And today we're talking about forgiveness. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I always say whenever someone asks me, tell me a bit about myself, I always say it's not never the Jordan Turner show, right? It's never just about me, me, me. It's always about us in life. But just to give people a little bit of background, as you said, I'm a health and wellness coach. My whole background has always been around the pillar of health. Health is, to me, the most valuable currency we have. And it's always been around the body-based practices, mindset, and breath work. And obviously, we're here today to talk about forgiveness. And of course, I've been on my own forgiveness journey. I've been a part of facilitating and seeing and witnessing and sharing stories of forgiveness with clients and friends and family members. And it's interesting. You obviously asked me to create this link and have this discussion around this subject. And it'd be nice to actually express and talk about that in this context, which is cool.
Yeah, definitely. And to give it, I guess, a bit of rationale and to explain to the listeners why we're doing this. So emotional eating, there are many reasons why we do eat emotionally, shame, guilt, but also resentment, and a lot of things that are really in the background. So for example, if you're listening to this podcast and you've done a lot of work, but still you find sometimes yourself this emotion, and I think, Jordan, you will describe it better, maybe in your heart, like your heart is tight and everything, and you go to food to feel better. There might be a big place for forgiveness, and we'll talk about forgiving who and what, etc. And when the release happens, then you won't have this strong emotion that will push you to go to food. So this is the rationale of why I think forgiving is so important in your emotional eating journey. Definitely not an expert on forgiveness. I think I've forgiven like some people in my life, but I still have a lot to do. So I'm going to learn as well. And my first question for you is how, I guess, if we want to define forgiveness, what's the opposite of forgiveness? And how does it turn up in our life?
Interesting. I like that. The opposite. The opposite of forgiveness is resentment, is holding grudges, is closing off to people, situations, or things. The opposite is kind of a downward spiral of energy, a part where we, as I said, we feel very closed, we feel very shut off, we feel separated from the person we're not forgiving, or sometimes even the world around us when we're carrying this resentment or this pain or this challenge in our heart. So the opposite of it is that, and that can show up in our lives in many different ways. That can sometimes show up unconsciously through particular behaviors. That can sometimes show up very physically, and even sometimes even in our posture and even in our body. Sometimes we can become like even rounded in our shoulders and shut off, and we look down. That can even affect our confidence. That can affect how we interact with the world. It can make us be shorter with others. It can lead to a bitterness. There's all many things that are the kind of the opposite of that energy of forgiveness. And we also, the moment we're not forgiving, we're caught up in the past, we're caught up in patterns, we're caught up in old behaviors. So we carry these behaviors into our day to day. So we're not free of those patterns in any way. So it's kind of the opposite of it is almost like being encaged by a particular event of the past.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And you started describing it a bit how it is in the body. The more and more I work on emotional eating, I realize that, and also working with you, as your client, I realize that emotional eating and emotional eaters, I don't like to label emotional eating as an identity, but people that do emotional eating, basically, it's harder for them to understand what they feel because everything is numbed with food. So the self-awareness there's an extra step or extra layer to do it to understand. So for those people, how can they recognize, for example, in the body or in their thoughts that, okay, I'm not forgiving someone or myself. We're going to talk about if you're giving others and yourselves, but just in general, how can they know that there's still resentment there?
Interesting. And it was a really good question because sometimes you even hear someone, they'll be like, "Oh, I've already forgiven them." And yeah, maybe on a very surface level, yes, but not really. Not really, because they're still holding these resentments. So one thing it does require us to be brutally honest with ourselves.
Mm.
And brutally sometimes sounds like a strong, scary word and like we're being mean to ourselves. Absolutely not. It's not about blaming ourselves in any way. It's understandable and natural that to have these feelings and things that come up. There's no shame in it whatsoever. But being completely real, not trying to hide behind something but it's understandable if we are because we're trying to protect ourselves, right? So we often know that we're holding forgiveness because we have this idea that we need to protect, we need to guard, we need to close. So we have these feelings of being closed, being guarded, not wanting to necessarily feel. We're looking for moments of escape or looking for moments of release or looking for reasons of why we need to feel this particular way towards someone else or whatever it is. So it can show up in many different ways. And the question is like, how do we know? It's kind of an answer that people might want to hear because deep down we know. We
Mm.
deeply know.
Yeah.
Yeah. How
And
do we know?
probably if
We
they've
know.
clicked on this episode, they know.
Yes. Yeah. So we know. And obviously it's also a process as well, right? It doesn't mean that sometimes we might have took steps towards forgiveness, but we're processing it. It's not about being a complete, like sometimes even people might be listening to now and thinking, okay, I'm coming here talking about forgiveness and saying, okay, this is the expert, a complete product of what being fully forgiven is, and that's where we got to get to, and this is the perfect spot. No, it's about recognizing it, like as you said, the word, having the self-awareness to continually, as a daily practice, forgiving ourselves and also others. Sometimes forgiveness is not always about forgiving others, it's also about forgiving ourselves, sorry. And sometimes we must remember to have forgiveness for our own self too.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of some listeners that might be thinking, I'm not ready to forgive. I'm not ready now. And there is a sentence that we hear often, and I've heard it also from you, is forgive. I took a note. I mean, it's not that complicated, but I took notes. You forgive for yourself and not for others.
Mm-hmm.
How can you explain this? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what does it mean for listeners?
There's a surface level to this statement, and there's a depth to the statement. We'll start with the depth. I like to go into the
Oh,
depths.
well, I was thinking you're going to start with the surface.
No, we're going to the depths and we're going backwards from here. The depth of it is there is no other. Absolutely not. There's a great thing. I love Bruce Lee, right? And he says, "There's no opponent. There is no other." Once we can realize this idea that we are absolutely connected. So but where is our point of power? Our point of power is on our own actions, our own thoughts, and our own behaviors and our own choices. So we must do it for ourselves first and foremost. And as we do it for ourselves, then we automatically do it for the other because you freed the other because you've done it for yourself. When we're sometimes looking, okay, I'm forgiven for them, sometimes we're still carrying that little bit of grudge because we ourselves haven't let ourselves be free of it. So it has to start there. It has to start with that. And sometimes that is the process towards it because sometimes we're not ready to accept their behaviors. We're not ready to accept what happened. I want to be very clear that forgiveness is absolutely does not mean that we agree with particular behaviors or stand for particular behaviors. It does not mean that whatsoever. Some things we can absolutely disagree with, but still be forgiven towards that person. All right, we can still have forgiveness that way. So
what does that mean? Does it mean that if you forgive someone, but you don't accept what they've done, how can you forgive someone if you haven't accept? Yeah, I'm just challenging because
good, great. So for example, let's just say someone continually steals money from you. They stole money from you your whole life and you wasn't aware of it and you realize and you're struggling to forgive them, right? Now, you don't necessarily agree with the behavior of stealing from another person, but you can forgive them because you can understand if you was them, because we often say, oh, if I was them, I wouldn't do that. If you was someone else, you would do exactly what they did do because you would be them. You would think the same way. You'd have had the same traumas. You'd had the same situations. You'd have the same thoughts. So you would always act as if the other person would act because you would be them. So if they acted that way, you would act that way. So this idea of I wouldn't act that way if I was them is not true, because if you were them, you'd absolutely act like that. But we look at it and we can not agree with stealing. We can say stealing, I do not agree with stealing, and I will do my best to avoid someone being able to steal from me. However, I could see that this person was very desperate. I could see that this person was maybe had addiction issues, or just giving examples of what
Like
was going on.
compassion almost for
I can have
others.
compassion towards this individual and understanding of potentially where they were coming from, so I can forgive the action. I can forgive what happened, but it doesn't mean that I accept the behavior, or I think the behavior is acceptable, or I allow that behavior to happen in my life again. Does that make sense?
Actually, it leads, I know we were going to talk about the less deep level, but it leads me to my other question, which is, what's the difference between forgiving and being walked all over?
Great. When you're not forgiven, you are being walked all over. That person, that event, that situation is living in your head rent free, is living in your body, it's living in your actions, it's living in your life, it's living in your relationships with other people. They are walking all over you. Always. If there's not forgiveness for the person, this person walks all over your whole life. Your whole life is affected. So it goes back to what you're saying. That's why we forgive for ourselves first. If we're not ready to forgive the other person, forgive for yourself first. Set yourself free at first. Once you set yourself free, it's easier to have that. Sometimes it's difficult to get to that space, like I was talking about, and having the compassion from that person who stole, or that person that hurt us in some way, or whatever it was, this idea that we have, or the situation it had. But it starts from there, right? Is that starting to make a bit more sense? Like, it's this idea that, like, if we do not let go of that resentment in our hearts, then we're living in that way. We start acting that way. We don't trust. We close off to situations. We may avoid particular things. So the difference between forgiving and being walked over is paramount, in the sense of, if you don't forgive, you are being walked over. But then there's the other side of it. People are like, yeah, but I forgive this person, that means I got to take them back. No, absolutely not. Maybe, for example, that maybe something happened. Someone has a particular relationship where they don't agree with their partner cheating, for example, right? They can't forgive their partner for cheating, right? So they don't have to be back in that relationship to forgive that individual. Right? Maybe they will when they work through the cheating and work forward. That's great. And maybe I'm not giving the best example here because there's so many different factors and things going on. But it doesn't mean that we allow ourselves to get walked over. It doesn't mean that we allow that behavior to happen again and again and again. No, it just means we forgive the action. I see what could have been happening within that person, why they made that decision, and I have forgiveness for them. I'm not going to hold my resentment in my heart for what they did, because I'm not responsible for the actions. I see things from others' perspective. I avoid being judgmental. However, I will no longer allow this person to do that to me.
Yeah, so it's like...
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so in a way, sometimes people are afraid to forgive because they don't want to be hurt again and again. But no, it's saying, like, you still can have boundaries, but
Absolutely.
you want, the amount of time and energy and everything you put for that person by forgiving will be reduced.
Absolutely. And if this idea of, like, we don't be hurt again and again and again, by not forgiving, every single day you're reliving that hurt. Every single day you're reliving that hurt. For example, if someone punches me in the face right now, in a short period of time, that's going to heal, right? The bruise or whatever it happens is going to heal. But the memory or the trauma or the situation, if I repeat it in my mind again and again and again and again, I'm hurting myself every day. There's no longer the physical bruise, but every single day I'm re-hurting myself with that situation. Right? If I forgive that individual, it doesn't mean that I'm allowing someone to punch me in the face.
Yeah.
It means that I'm accepting it as it was.
Okay. So, okay. Now, if we go a step further, what about, let's say, an example of someone you've forgiven, but then they hurt you again, the same thing. I'm going to give an example. Let's say not an ex, because let's say an ex, they decide that it's out of this person, they want it out of their life. So it might be harder for them to do the same mistake again. But let's say especially a lot of emotional eaters, again, I always do this mistake where I say emotional eaters. Now, people that do emotional eating, they had a difficult childhood. Their parents maybe were not emotionally present, or like maybe even more, they had trauma and like violence and everything. They decide, so I'm thinking of a previous client. Her father was really, really bad with her, but still in her life, she was 50 years old. The father was like 70 and everything. Let's say she decides to forgive him and still keep him in her life, because this person has not changed, will still do the same, still say, use the same words, the same violence and verbal violence and everything. So you forgive someone, you keep them in your life because let's say you want to, because they're your family, but still they will hurt you again because they haven't changed maybe, or some things. Yeah.
No,
What
so I
do you
think
think of
when we
this?
get here, we're blurring the lines of two separate things.
Okay.
So I absolutely see where you're coming from though. But there's a little bit of space we need to create between those two things. There's a couple of things to unpack within that example, which is a great example, very true, and it's one of the reasons, the things that we get caught up in, one of the things we tell ourselves that can hinder and delay and stop our forgiveness, and or sometimes we create this idea of forgiveness, but then we're accepting particular behaviors and not taking charge of our life and changing in a particular way. So this situation which you're talking about, first of all, and this is it. When I say this on the surface, people get very offended with this one, but no one can hurt you.
You
We get
decide.
hurt.
Yeah.
We get hurt as a result of other people, what someone else did. Right? I'm on about emotionally here. Right? So emotionally, it's we allow. So what someone did, they didn't direct. So for example, say someone swears at you, right, and you get offended. All right.
Yeah.
Now, imagine they swear at you in a language that you do not understand, and they did it with a smile when you didn't realize they were swearing. You're not offended. It's
Yeah.
not the actions that offended you. It's about your perception of the actions. For example, if someone calls me a particular name, if I like being called that name, I'm happy. If I don't like being called that name, I'm hurt. So it's my perception of their behavior is which will hurt me. They didn't directly hurt me emotionally. We
It's so
must make that
funny
clear
that you're
distinction.
saying.
But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that, as you're saying, you could have someone. That does not mean that certain behavior, that means, okay, no one hurt me. So that means I just let this abuse happen, this emotional manipulation, or no. Does not mean that. But when we can create that separation, we can have that awareness of our own space. And as we have that awareness, we through when we fully forgive someone, it means you fully love someone. And when you fully love someone, you love them unconditionally. But when you love someone unconditionally, you want what's best for them. And doing what's best for someone isn't doing what's convenient always, isn't doing what someone likes, isn't doing what someone doesn't like. When you truly love someone, you do what's best for them. For example, let's take a simple thing. Maybe someone's never ever took the initiative to do their own washing up, and now you're roommate and you're living with them. If you always do their washing up, your roommate never learns to take responsibility. So sometimes the most loving thing to do is make them do their own washing up. So sometimes the most loving thing to do is to say no, is to say no to that behavior. When we truly forgive someone, we love them unconditionally, and we love them so much that we say, no, thank you. No, thank you. I will not allow you to treat me like that, because that means you're treating us like that. And that means it's beyond me. So you are also the bearer of that pain, and I will not be an enabler. I will not enable this behavior. I will not enable or allow this behavior, because I have forgiveness for myself. Therefore, I have love and compassion for my own self, and I have forgiveness for you. I have love and compassion for you. So therefore, I'm going to do what's best for us. And what's best for us right now is not to be in this situation. Or what's best for us right now is I will be in this situation, but this must change. And if it can't change, then unfortunately, we will have to have some space. These
Yeah.
kind of situations can happen. These are a part of forgiveness, but sometimes we mold it all together and it gets a bit mucky. We must create that slight separation between forgiving someone and living with people's actions and behaviors are two different things, but they absolutely interlink and they intertwine. Of course, there's a dance that's happening. But true forgiveness, when you have true forgiveness in your heart, true forgiveness in yourself, true forgiveness for others, then this becomes simple. Very simple. I always say if it's too complicated, it's not it. There's a
Yeah.
simplicity that you notice, and you'll notice the simplicity. And I'm not the teacher. I don't have the answers. I don't have all the answers sitting here for forgiveness. All right. But life does. And one of the greatest teachers is love. What would love do? All right. And we all have different ideas of love, and we must learn it. When we learn it in our own heart, and we learn that through forgiveness practices, it's much easier to make decisions. And we realize, this is what's best, not because this is what's familiar. Because some people associate love or whatever with sometimes abuse or sometimes force, because that's what's familiar, that's what they've learned. But once we move beyond what we've learned, once we transcend that through the practice of forgiveness, we're in our awareness, we're in the present moment. We're no longer basing it on our learned behaviors. We're basing it on the present moment and being able to respond in the most loving, best way we physically can, understanding that we're not always perfect. I know I'm not, definitely not perfect. We're imperfectly perfect, and we can start to be perfectly okay with that.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm thinking of those listeners that are maybe thinking, okay, they have someone in mind that hurt them or they've been hurted by them. See, I'm learning from you quickly. So there's someone in mind, and they're thinking, like, if for them it's stepwise. First I forgive and then I will love them. Like they're thinking, no, like, how can you ask me to love this person? Like, I'm so far from that. I think my answer would be, but I want your answer. Otherwise, I wouldn't have you in the podcast. But I think my answer would be start with doing the work on yourself and love yourself, and like kind of therapy or whatever you want. But just do the work with you, and then. But what would be your answer? Like, yeah, how? Like, I'm sure someone is thinking, because that's how I was thinking. I hate this person. They've been so bad to me all my life. And now, in order to forgive them, it means I'm going to love them. No way. You
This is
know?
really interesting. This idea, it's true. It's this idea of, yeah, I hate this person.
Yeah.
To even hate someone means you love them.
Yeah, definitely. So true.
It means you love them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It means you love them.
Yeah.
To have this hate, it means you love them.
Mm.
Be like, no, it doesn't mean I love them. It means
Yeah, otherwise you wouldn't care.
it means you desire them to be different than how they are, but you love them.
Yeah.
And like you said, the steps, where does it start? How do we start? How do we get into it? And we're thinking ahead, and I'm not ready, and I don't know what that even could look like, and I don't know if I want to. And we have our arms folded, and we can see it. We'll close our posture off, and we're shut off. And first of all, I'm not here. First of all, I'm not here to tell someone what they should or shouldn't do. As you know me, you know that's a swear word to me. Should and shouldn't. That's an absolute swear word. I'm not here to tell people what they should or shouldn't do, or judge someone, or tell people their journey, what their journey to forgiveness may look like. For all of us, it's different. We all got to go through different stages. Everything we feel is valid, and that's okay. All right. And it's important to accept how we're feeling and understand how we're feeling. And let's start there, first of all. Let's start there. We've taken the judgments away from the fact that we think we're not forgiven.
Yeah.
That just keeps us in the loop. That
So
keeps us
true.
in this.
Yeah.
This keeps us caught up in the trap of being unforgiven. Let's first of all take away the judgment. Let's say you are experiencing hate in your heart towards someone else. Don't judge yourself for that. That's okay. Start there. Start there. That's where you start. The journey starts by going, it's absolutely okay, however I'm feeling in this moment. The next is by taking radical responsibility. And that can be really tough, because there's a part of us that thinks it's not fair. They need to be the one who does it. And they take. Fair enough. And again, it's valid that you feel that way. However, your point of power is with you. So why wait? I always say to someone, why wait? You're going to wait for someone else to change. You might wait lifetimes. And stubbornness doesn't really serve too much most of the time. So maybe it's a good idea to let go of that. So first of all, how I'm feeling is valid. I'm going to take radical responsibility. That doesn't mean I'm going to take blame. I want to make very clear. It does not mean I'm taking radical blame. I use the word responsibility, not blame. And we're not blaming ourselves for what happened. And we're also not responsible for what happened, but we're responsible for how we respond right now.
Yeah.
So when I say radical responsibility, I mean radical responsibility of how I'm going to choose to respond in this present moment now to that situation that happened to me. It does not mean I was responsible for what happened to me. Say someone hit me with a car. I'm not responsible for being hit with a car, but I'm responsible how I respond as a result of that. If someone did a particular behavior towards me, left me, abused me, hit me, whatever it is, I am not responsible for their actions, but I'm responsible for how I respond to them. And I'm going to take my power back. So forgiveness starts by taking your power back, because you give so much of it out to that person. If you're not forgiving them, it means they have your power. And that's what I meant by they're walking all over you day in, day. So you take your power back. And as you take the power back, there's an opportunity. One place to start is sit with how that feels in by itself. And as you start sinking into that, you'll feel a subtleness, a stillness. We often try and do these things logically, cognitively. And that's okay. That has in my view, that has a purpose. That has there's a point to it. There's a use to it. But in my view, that's not it. We must go beyond the cognitive way of looking at it. We must go into depths of feeling it, and to the point where we're not just feeling it, we're experiencing it. And sometimes we might not be able to go from not experiencing it to experiencing it straight away. So sometimes we need to go through the stages. One of those stages, what could that feel like? Maybe we just
It's
sit
very
with what
relevant for emotional eating, because emotional eating is all about not feeling your emotions. And you're saying, no, start feeling your emotions.
Start feeling. This would be my because this the feel through it. Thinking is the language of the mind, very useful. Feeling is the language of the body. And we go with feeling, and not by labeling. Often we label emotions. This is a happy emotion. This is a sad emotion. This is anger. This is this is that. Okay. In language, it serves a purpose, but in feelings, it doesn't. Look at your feelings like you're looking at through a magnifying glass or like a science experiment. Just feel them. Feel. Don't give it a label. Don't say this is anger. Feel it. Is it warm? Is it
Like,
cold?
where is it?
Notice it. Where is it in the body? Start to become aware of it. Start feeling into it. And a practice is try your best not to contract to it. Every time we feel a strong emotion, there's a contraction that happens
In the body.
So best to relax into that contraction. That's all. That's just all the challenges, to relax into the contractions that come up. Start opening. And as we start opening, things will come up, feelings will come up. Remember not to judge them. Remember to let yourself go through the natural processes. I personally think forgiveness is a natural state. Whoa, that seems a strange thing to say. I think it's natural. I think we stop our natural state. So people think, how do I forgive? You absolutely internally know exactly everything you need for forgiveness. You have all the tools you possibly could ever need. It's natural, right? It's just as natural as the hair that grows on your skin or your hair or whatever it is. These things that are developing. It's just
We
as
see it
natural.
in kids a lot. Like kids, like even like, let's say if I say something to my kids, I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. Like, and then I say sorry, or even when I don't say sorry, they forget, like they just, there's no like resentment. They don't hold any grudge.
Often, sure. Yeah. Because they're more present, typically. Right? A child up to a certain age is very present. So
They're
when
less
we're
scared.
present, yeah, to hold a grudge, we absolutely have to be in the past, right? I can't hold a grudge unless your
Yeah.
mind on some level is living in the past. There's no grudge. A grudge can't exist right now. I can't hold a grudge right now. To hold a grudge means I'm holding on to the past and bringing it here and now. So I'm not experiencing right here, right now. I'm experiencing a jaded view of the now. I'm experiencing my stories and my perceptions about the now.
Mm.
I have those perceptions about what's happening. Right. I'm not allowing myself to really see it for as it is.
Yeah. I just want to, I don't know, it's a thought I've been having in this episode. I just want to acknowledge that maybe there's some layer, like some uh, things that are easier to forgive and some that are harder to forgive. So if someone is listening and had something really, really, really bad to them, I just want to say, like, again, what you were saying, like no judgment and everything. It might be harder. It might take more time, or it's different layers to peel off before getting there.
Absolutely. Like there's different degrees. Some things are quite surface and smaller issues, and some things are very, very deep, very deep. And there's some very real ones I'm very aware of. And I want to make sure that those people know that there's a respect for that, there's an
Yeah.
understanding for that. And that is part of the no judgment. And that's absolutely okay. And a lot of the time, in a lot of those stronger cases, it's absolutely understandable. You can sit there and go, I absolutely get why you're not forgiven right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. First of all, and don't you start thinking and blaming yourself even further. Let's stop that now, right away. That definitely needs to get the window, because often when people have had those deeper things, that's where their go-to is to beat themselves up further, because someone's allowed them to think that they're not worth shit.
Yeah.
So we first of all must recognize that's okay. There are all these feelings, and it will become your superpower,
Yeah.
because you've experienced a certain depth, and everything has an opposite end of the spectrum. So what that will be is when those deeper things have happened, that's like savings in the bank. You've got all this love that's ready to pour into you, to show you and guide you and see purpose and meaning in that challenging, horrendous experience that you may have had. And then some people feel guilty because their thing's quite subtle. And they're like, I can't forgive it. It's so minor, a silly little thing, but I can't forgive it. Some people say this, and they find that really difficult to forgive because it's so small, but they just can't quite let go of the grip.
Maybe
That's
there's
okay.
something deeper also. And they're
Sometimes,
using this.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Sometimes this and sometimes that. And it's always relative. So I'm not, and it's really important that, yes, we're talking very broadly about the things as individual cases and as individual situations, but they ultimately always come back to that. And even if we think, oh, well, I can't, I don't want to, remember that at the very least, we're forgiven for ourselves. At the very least, because set yourself free. Forget the other person. Doesn't matter what someone did. That's why it doesn't matter how horrendous it is that what that person done is actually, that's more reason to forgive. The worse it is, or the idea of how bad it is, this idea of bad, the more reason surely then to do it. Because
it's
only
affecting
if
you more.
yeah, absolutely. Take your power back. Reclaim your life. Reclaim your life and start being able to pour into others what you can.
Yeah. And I think by just not judging themselves and not feeling guilty of having, like, the first step already will reduce a lot of emotional eating, because guilt is one of the biggest reasons why guilt and shame, why we eat emotionally. It's like
Absolutely.
very low. There is David Hawking. He has a level of like he ranked the emotion based on, he did a test based on, and I have an episode on that for the listeners. I'll put it in the show notes. But basically, how the muscles are contracted, the strength of the muscles based on specific emotions, and shame and guilt are very low, the closest to death. And like these are things really, really that make us eat.
Interesting.
Yeah. What about forgiving? I think I know your answers, and I think I know it's always like this with you. What about forgiving someone who's not alive anymore? Is it the same process? Is it different?
It's the same. It's
I
pretty
was
much.
like, you were gonna say.
It's look, the physical being is no longer alive, but the same way the physical experience of something that happened is no longer alive. So it's no different, really, because the I say it's no different. I'll be very clear. It is, in terms of the experience towards it, is different though, for sure, because sometimes for some people's forgiveness journey, some people's forgiveness journey doesn't involve necessarily having to directly contact or be in contact with the individual they're forgiving or the situation they're forgiving. Remember, we're not just talking about forgiving individuals here. Sometimes forgiveness is about forgiving situations or forgiving actions or forgiving behaviors or forgiving, like, even areas, maybe places where we live. We hold resentment, we don't forgive that area because we felt certain things happened, or a home, or it can be many things.
Country.
Yeah, country sometimes. Unforgiveness for a country or whatever. It could be many things. It could go all kinds of layers to it. But sometimes people's journey is very physical based. So they return to that place or that person, or they send a letter, or they that's part of the process. That's part of the healing process. Well, obviously, when someone's no longer alive, we don't have that privilege. We don't have that ability to do that. However, we absolutely have the ability to still go into the consciousness of that individual. We still have the ability to go into the feelings around what happened when they were alive. And we have the ability to feel into that relationship. And it's all happening within us. Remember, this whole thing is all about what's happening within us. It's not about putting our attention outside and telling other people what they should or shouldn't be doing, or what they need to do so you can forgive. If you do that, then I can forgive. That's not forgiveness.
It's interesting because also I'm thinking of other cases where the person is alive, let's say a parent, in childhood trauma. I mean, I'm not a therapist, but that's what my knowledge about it is. Sometimes you go no contact, it's called. Basically, you cut off someone, an abusive parent or someone. Maybe if they've gone no contact, they're not talking to that person, they can still do the work in their mind, in their body.
Just like at the end of the day, I'm not here to necessarily fully advise someone's
Yeah, it's true. You're right.
path, but yeah, you don't have to physically. One thing I will say is you don't have to physically. One thing that's clear, I won't necessarily advise what's going on. That's not my place. But what I will say is you don't have to physically be in front of someone to forgive them necessarily. Well, you don't have to. That's the truth. The truth is you physically don't have to have someone in front of you to have forgiveness. The key is about having forgiveness in your heart.
Yeah.
As a result of that, sometimes it's nice to solidify it in actuality and solidify in person. And in certain cases, that I've seen that be of great benefit, and in many other cases, it's not necessary.
Yeah, I've left the hardest point to the end, which is forgiving yourself.
Hey. So is there a question around that, or are we just the subject of forgiving yourself?
It's like, how the fuck do you do it? Yeah, how do you do it to forgive yourself? It's the hardest. I've realized this, and someone told me, like a coach, that I haven't the thing that was blocking me was that I hadn't forgiven myself, and I had no idea that I was still holding resentment and grudges against myself. And when they said this, it made so much sense.
So first of all, we need to look at whatever it is. Ultimately, it comes from a judgment, right? When we look at forgiveness, because we judge, we must be very clear. It's a judgment. We're judging something because right or wrong, good or bad, something we should or shouldn't have done. So we're judging ourselves. We're judging ourselves for a behavior. So the key is to look at it objectively, first of all. So whatever we did, we're looking at ourselves, our behavior that we're not forgiving. So we must start first by identify what it is that we're not forgiving. So I don't forgive myself. Don't forgive yourself for what? First of all, we need to see what that is. For what? What is it?
Yeah.
And then maybe there's a list. Maybe there's loads. I know for me, there's a big old list. I have this.
And sometimes, yeah.
And sometimes someone else, they'll be like, what are you on about? Oh, sorry, I lost me there.
No, we can still hear you.
Yes. So sorry. For someone else, they might be like, what are you on about, Jordan? Like, that's not a big thing. Like, forgive yourself. Like, but if I don't feel it in my heart, I must work through it. So we can start there. Start by forgive yourself for what? What do you need to forgive yourself for? Ask yourself these questions and you'll go through it. And one thing that can help, a tool towards forgiveness, is to rectify old misdeeds wherever possible. Now that sounds like a bit of a contradiction, because you're like, so I thought you said not to judge and there's no misdeed if you're not judging, which is true, but we believe there's a misdeed. So if we believe there's a misdeed, right? It's not necessarily that there was or wasn't, but if we believe there was, what can we do to rectify it? Right? So there could be simple things. You could be like, oh, I'm judging myself because once I overcharged someone or something like this, let's say. Yeah. Okay, well, how can you rectify it? Give someone a discount tomorrow. Done. There you go.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a tool. I'm not saying that's the answer for forgiveness. I'm saying it's a tool. It's to rectify the old misdeeds wherever possible. Sometimes that might not always be with that person. So maybe we acted a particular way in a past relationship, right? And that relationship's gone. It's sailed its boat. That person may be with someone else, or something else is happening. You're in a new relationship. And you might go, well, how can I rectify that old misdeed? Well, you'd learn the lesson.
Oh, yeah, just learning it.
Now it's worthwhile. You learn the lesson. You go, oh, in that way, I was constantly snappy, or I was moody, or I was this. And I'm going to choose not to be that way to the best of my ability. Wow. Now it has purpose. Now we see the purpose in pain. We learn through pain, right? Pain is a teacher, and it's a tough teacher, and it's a brutal teacher at times, but it is a teacher. And if we allow it to be a teacher, we can see its beauty and we can see its softer side rather than the harsher side of the pain. And as we see the softer side of pain, where does that take us? It takes us to a pleasure. And as we start to see the space between pain and pleasure, we get to a space beyond that, where we see that they're both fleeting states and our awareness always remains. And as we linger in awareness, we linger in a space of contentment. As we linger in a space of contentment, we begin to choose And if we begin to find peace, when we begin to find peace, we begin to choose happiness. And our choice for happiness is much greater than our choice to hold grudges and resentment. And as we're choosing happiness, we may be lucky enough for joy to come say hello.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Especially for when you don't forgive yourself for actions. I think, again, I don't want to generalize all the listeners, but having like knowing a bit about the listeners, many of them feel that it's an overstatement, that I just want to say, just to see how you feel and how you think about this so we can help others. Maybe they feel that their being is a mistake. Just being on earth was a mistake, maybe because their parents did not make them feel this, or the way the education was very like shame and judgment. So it's not that they did a mistake, but they feel they are a mistake, you know? How do you do it? Is it just the same but more work, longer work?
Great question. So I'm sure there's many layers to this. I'm sure there's many layers. I'm sure there's many rationale, many reasons why one may believe that they are a mistake. But once we drop into the awareness, you realize that there is no such thing. How can there be? How can this existence that is so like this, it's almost a bit airy-fairy for sometimes people, but it is so magical. It is a miracle to be alive. Like the fact that you're alive, like the process of it. Like some people are lucky in, for example, they're able to conceive very easily, for example. So they don't always notice how the miracle of what conception is. Some people have tougher journeys. Some people may have chose not to, all different things. But when you really witness it and see it, or even when it's been easier, you watch the happen, like you're a mother yourself, for example, right? Like, how can you say that process of becoming a mother, that moment, how can you say that child that you conceived, right, was a mistake?
Mm.
You can't. There's no way you can look at how. What do you mean this is a mistake? And you go, oh no, but I'm not saying this is a mistake. Someone might go, someone else might be there, but yeah, but we didn't plan on having a child, so yeah, this is it was a mistake, whatever, right? Oh my goodness, we control freaks where we really think, right? So like this is how much I think I'm in control. That I think I'm going to look at life and think life itself is a mistake. I don't know how to produce life. I've not been able to witness it or create it, right? Life is this thing that gets produced, this happening that I witness and see, this miracle. There's no mistake. There's no mistake. And if you think life is a mistake, then everything's a mistake, then it's all okay. We're all set free that way too.
We're all equal, you
right?
know?
It's all a mistake, so don't worry about it, right? Then the whole game's a mistake. So then it's all a mistake. There's nothing to worry about. This is the thing. So there's a process. There's probably a deeper process to that, and why we feel that we may feel we're a mistake. But I may not have all the answers, but one thing I feel very strongly in my heart, there's no one listening to this right now. There's no one on this planet right now that's a mistake.
Wow. Can you repeat this as last words?
I really feel in my own heart that there's not a single person, a single thing that's on this planet that is a mistake.
Thank you, Jordan. So one last question. If people want to find you or reach out or get more of your content, where can they find you?
They can find me on jordanjackturner.com, Jordan Jack Turner on Instagram, jordanjackturner@gmail.com. It's basically just Jordan Jack Turner, nice and simple. They can work with me online. They can work with me in person. They can just reach out with a question, and maybe they don't want to work with me, but maybe they just want to share something. If I get back to them, you know me, I'm not always the best at getting back. I'm not the greatest at getting back, but I'll always eventually get back, right? I'll always eventually get there. I'll always eventually get there, and I appreciate it. And if I can support, be of service, I absolutely will. If I can point you in a direction on your journey towards someone else or something else, I will. if we just connect in some way and I can't support, that's also great too. Right, whenever we can, it's always nice to connect with different people, and hopefully people felt they took something from it. And also I want people to remember that they don't have to agree with everything I said. I think this is really healthy. I think often people share opinions and share perspectives, and often people come in and I'm right and everyone's wrong, and this is my perspective, this is how people should look at the life, and this is it. I don't agree with that. I want everyone to know that they don't have to agree with everything I said, but may it have sparked some kind of question within themselves, may it have sparked some kind of journey towards or continue their journey of forgiveness. I'm certainly continuing mine. And I'll finish by saying, to me, we know we're fully forgiven when we absolutely accept and recognize there's nothing to forgive in the first place. We have full acceptance. Full acceptance of life as it is. Life isn't always how we want it to be, but life is always as it is. And the more we live with life as it is, we then begin to see the beauty of as it is, and we realize that we don't need to control so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.